She chose you, Apache women said to the lonely rancher who saved their wounded sister. It sat at the edge of a wide open plain where the grass waved like golden waves under the wind. Mountains stood far in the distance, their peaks sharp and cold in the morning light. Every day the rancher rose early, before the sun painted the sky, and walked through his land, checking fences, feeding the cattle, and making sure nothing had gone wrong overnight. The wind and the vast openness were his companions, but they did not speak or answer. Still, he liked the silence. It gave him time to think, to remember, and to feel at peace with the emptiness of his life. He had been alone for many years. Long ago, a terrible accident had taken his family, and since then he had avoided deep connections with anyone. The townspeople knew him, of course, though only a little. Some called him quiet, others thought him strange. But the rancher didn't mind. He found comfort in routines, in the rhythm of the land, and in the slow passage of time. His days were predictable, and that predictability made him feel safe. He could take care of his animals, fix his fences, and sleep soundly at night, knowing he was in control of his little world. Yet sometimes, when the wind blew harsh and lonely across the fields, he felt a twinge of longing for something more, something he could not name. One late afternoon, the sky a mix of orange and purple, the rancher went out to check the eastern fence line. He had noticed some broken wires the day before and wanted to fix them before the night settled. As he walked along the dusty trail, the wind tugged at his coat, carrying the dry scent of grass and earth. Suddenly, something caught his eye. It was a figure, a person moving awkwardly near the edge of the river that ran through his land. At first, he thought it was one of the cattle wandering too close to the water, but as he squinted, he realized it was a human. The figure was small and stumbling, dragging one leg behind. The rancher's heart quickened. He had seen people in trouble before, though rarely. The nearest town was miles away, and help would not come quickly. He considered his options. The figure could be dangerous, or perhaps hurt, or maybe lost. Fear gnawed at him, but his stronger instinct was to help. He had never turned away someone in need before. With careful steps he approached, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. As he got closer, he saw more clearly. It was a young woman, her clothes torn and dirty, and she leaned against a tree for support. Blood streaked her leg and her arm, and she shivered, partly from pain, partly from the cold evening air. The rancher called out gently, "Hey there, are you okay?" His voice was calm, but it carried across the plain. The woman froze, her eyes wide and fearful. She did not answer. He stopped a few feet away, letting her see he meant no harm. "I can help you," he said softly. "You're hurt. Come with me, I can take care of you." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, with a slow, cautious movement, she nodded. He could see the tension in her body, the way she resisted trusting him, but she had no choice. She could not move on her own. Carefully he helped her to his horse, lifting her gently. She winced in pain but did not speak. He guided the horse slowly back toward his home, keeping his eyes on her to make sure she was stable. The sun was now low, and the mountains cast long shadows over the land. It was a quiet, tense ride, broken only by the soft sound of the horse's hooves on the dirt and the occasional bird calling somewhere in the distance. When they reached his house, he helped her down and guided her inside. He led her to a chair by the fire and gently examined her injuries. Her leg was badly bruised, and there were shallow cuts on her arm, likely from thorns or rocks. He cleaned her wounds with care, wrapping them with strips of cloth from his supply. She winced again but did not protest. Her eyes were dark and wary, watching him closely, trying to understand if she could trust this stranger who had carried her through the evening wind. He worked quietly, humming softly under his breath, not expecting gratitude but hoping his presence would not frighten her. Once he finished bandaging her wounds, he offered her some food. "You need to eat," he said. She hesitated, then took the plate he offered. She ate slowly, carefully, as if she were unsure if this was safe. He watched her, noticing the small signs of exhaustion and pain. She was young, no older than 20, but she had already faced difficulties he could only guess at. The rancher felt a strange sense of responsibility. He had never had anyone depend on him in this way. It was new, and at the same time it was quietly comforting. He realized that even in his solitary life, there were still moments that could remind him what it meant to care for another human being. As the night deepened, the rancher prepared a small bed for her near the fire. She lay down, wrapped in a blanket he had placed over her, and her breathing slowly became steady. He sat nearby, keeping watch, thinking about the day and the unusual turn of events. The silence of the house, usually so familiar and empty, now held a presence that made it feel alive. He found himself listening to the crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of the young woman, and even the distant howl of a coyote in the night. Life had shifted in that moment. For the first time in years, he did not feel completely alone. The rancher reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led him here. He had spent so long avoiding closeness with others, convincing himself that solitude was safer, simpler, and easier. Yet the sight of her, injured and vulnerable, had stirred something he thought had been buried. Compassion, protection, a reminder that even in the harshest and loneliest corners of life, connection could appear unexpectedly. He knew nothing about her story, where she came from, how she had gotten hurt, or what dangers might still be near. But he also knew he could not turn her away. That was not who he was. Outside, the wind blew over the plains, carrying the scent of earth and grass, and the night sky stretched wide and endless above them. The rancher sat in his chair, hands resting on his knees, eyes occasionally glancing at the young woman. Sleep might come soon, but he did not rush it. He let the silence speak. The quiet presence of another human being near him filled the room with a strange sense of warmth. For the first time in many years, the rancher felt that life could be more than just routines and empty fields. There could be stories, connections, and moments that changed everything, even for a man who thought he had nothing left to expect. As he watched her sleep, he whispered softly to himself, almost like a promise, "I'll keep you safe tonight." He did not know the challenges that lay ahead, nor the journeys they might face, but he knew that this night he had made a choice. And sometimes, a single choice could begin a story far bigger than anyone could imagine. The rancher, once lonely and isolated, was now a part of something new, a story just beginning, carried on the quiet wind of the plains and in the firelight of his small, sturdy home. The morning light seeped softly through the wooden shutters, painting the room in warm golds and oranges. The rancher had been awake for some time, sitting by the small fire, thinking about the young woman who had stumbled into his life the night before. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb her. She slept deeply, her face pale but peaceful, and her chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm. He could see the faint bruises beginning to darken on her arm, and the bandage on her leg was a careful reminder of the fragility of her body. He had seen many things in his life, but never a moment like this. A stranger, wounded and silent, trusting him enough to rest in his home. By the time she woke, the sun had risen fully, spilling light across the small room. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness. For a moment she stared at the ceiling, unsure where she was. Then her gaze fell on the rancher, who was quietly preparing a simple breakfast of bread, some eggs and water. He smiled gently, not a grand or forced smile, but a warm one, meant to reassure her that she was safe. She hesitated, her hands resting on the blanket, unsure if she should speak. Finally, in a voice soft and cautious, she asked, "Where am I?" "You're at my home," the rancher replied simply. "You were hurt near the river, I helped you." He didn't add anything else. He didn't want to frighten her with unnecessary details. She nodded slowly, her dark eyes taking in the room, the wooden walls, the small fire, the few belongings scattered around. Everything spoke of a life that was simple and quiet, yet carefully tended. For a moment there was silence between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire. Then she lowered herself from the bed with effort, leaning heavily on a chair as the rancher offered his steady support. He guided her to the table and handed her a plate. She looked at the food suspiciously at first, then began to eat. He watched her closely, noticing the small details, the way her hand trembled slightly, the way she flinched when she shifted her leg, the way her eyes kept darting toward the door as if expecting danger. It was clear that she had been through something difficult, something that had left her cautious, guarded, and wary of strangers. He understood that. He had lived a life of solitude, yes, but he also knew the weight of pain and fear. After breakfast, he helped her move to a chair by the window where the sunlight could warm her. He sat across from her, keeping a careful distance. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said. "Just rest. Take your time." She nodded but didn't speak. Instead, she traced her finger along the edge of the wooden table, her movements deliberate, almost as if she were measuring the safety of the space around her. The rancher watched silently, respecting her need for control. He had learned over the years that trust could not be rushed. It had to grow naturally, step by step. Hours passed slowly. The rancher kept busy around the house, mending fences, feeding the animals, and preparing supplies for the coming days. Yet he would glance toward her often, ensuring she was comfortable. She remained mostly quiet, but gradually, small gestures began to appear. A soft nod when he offered water, a faint smile when he handed her a warm cloth for her wounds. These small gestures were monumental. They were signs that she was beginning to feel a little safer, a little more willing to accept help from someone outside her own world. By afternoon, he decided to help her stand and walk around the yard. Carefully, he supported her as she took small steps, the sun warming her skin and the wind carrying the scent of grass and earth. She moved slowly, hesitant but determined. Each step seemed to build her confidence, and he felt a quiet pride in her courage. "Take it slow," he said. "No need to rush." She nodded again, focusing on each step, her eyes on the ground, but gradually looking up to notice the wide expanse of the ranch. She had never been in a place like this, with open plains stretching for miles, mountains rising in the distance, and animals grazing peacefully. It was a life so different from her own, yet it had a calmness that seemed to reach her weary spirit. As she walked, the rancher began to ask gentle questions, careful not to push too far. "Do you have family?" he asked softly. She paused, unsure how to answer. Her lips pressed into a thin line and she shook her head slightly. He didn't press further. He realized that whatever her story was, it carried pain and struggle that she might not be ready to share. And that was okay. Trust had to come naturally. Over the next few days, a rhythm began to form. The rancher tended to the young woman's wounds, cleaning them carefully and changing bandages. She ate when he offered food and drank water when he suggested. Slowly, she began to move more confidently around the house and yard. She even helped feed the animals, though her movements were cautious and deliberate. Each day, he noticed small improvements, less pain in her movements, more color in her cheeks, more warmth in her eyes. It was not a rapid recovery, but it was steady and meaningful. During this time, moments of connection started to appear in unexpected ways. She would watch him work, noticing the way he mended fences with patience, how he carefully handled the animals, how he respected the land. Sometimes she would offer small advice, a word here or there in her own language. The rancher didn't always understand, but he listened respectfully, nodding, letting her voice be heard without interruption. These small exchanges began to build a silent understanding between them, a bond that did not require many words but spoke volumes in gestures and attention. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat near the fire together. The young woman leaned slightly on her knees, hands resting on her lap, while the rancher tossed small pieces of wood into the flames. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. She spoke then, her voice soft, almost a whisper, about the land she came from, about the people she cared for, and about the struggles she had faced. Though broken into small sentences and hesitant words, it was the first time she had opened up. The rancher listened quietly, offering no judgment, just presence and understanding. Through the long hours of that evening, he realized something important. She was more than just a wounded stranger. She was a person of courage, resilience, and spirit who had faced dangers he could barely imagine, and she had allowed him into her life, fragile and cautious though it was. That simple act of trust touched him deeply, reminding him that even in a world that seemed harsh and unkind, there were still opportunities for connection, for care, and for hope. As night fell, he prepared a simple bed for her near the fire once more. She lay down, wrapping herself in the blanket, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax fully, letting go of the tension in her shoulders and face. The rancher sat nearby, watching her sleep, feeling a strange mixture of relief, admiration, and quiet joy. He knew that helping her had changed him too. It had reminded him that life, even in its most ordinary moments, could hold extraordinary meaning when shared with another person. Outside, the wind rustled the tall grasses, carrying the sounds of the land at night. Crickets sang, and the distant mountains loomed dark and silent. The rancher closed his eyes briefly, letting the sounds and the presence of the young woman fill the room with warmth. He realized that this was the beginning of something new, not just for her, but for him. Something that could grow, change, and perhaps bring light into the quiet corners of a life that had known too much solitude. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered quietly to himself, as if speaking to both the night and the young woman, "You're safe here. I'll take care of you." It was a promise he intended to keep, not out of obligation, but out of the simple truth that some bonds, however fragile or new, were worth protecting. And in that quiet, simple room, amidst the warmth of the fire and the stillness of the plains, two lives began to intertwine, setting the stage for a story of courage, trust, and unexpected connection. Days passed slowly on the ranch, and with each day the young woman grew stronger. Her wounds, once fresh and painful, were healing, though the scars remained as faint reminders of what she had endured. The rancher watched her carefully, helping when she stumbled or winced, but also giving her space to regain her independence. She began to move more freely around the yard, walking without leaning heavily on the chair or the rancher's arm. There was a quiet determination in her steps, a careful confidence that slowly replaced the fear and caution she had carried when she first arrived. The rancher noticed her subtle changes, the way she smiled briefly when the sun warmed her face, the way she hummed softly while feeding the animals, and the careful attention she gave to the fences and gates. It was not just a recovery of her body, but a healing of her spirit. Each small victory seemed to bring a little light into the rancher's own life, which had been long filled with quiet loneliness. He found himself talking to her more, telling small stories about the land, the animals, and his own life. At first, she listened silently, but slowly, she began to respond in short, careful phrases, sometimes asking questions or sharing small details of her life before she had been hurt. One morning, as the sun rose golden over the fields, the rancher led her to the corral where the horses were kept. "Today, we can try something new," he said gently, pointing to a small, calm horse. "I think you can ride if you want." Her eyes widened at the suggestion. Riding a horse required balance, courage, and trust, qualities she had not been able to use for some time. She hesitated, looking from the horse to the rancher and back again. Finally, after a few moments, she nodded. He helped her climb carefully onto the horse, steadying her as she found her seat. The horse, calm and used to gentle hands, shifted slightly under her weight but did not move too quickly. For a while she remained still, unsure how to hold the reins. The rancher walked beside her, speaking softly to guide her hands and movements. Gradually, she began to feel the rhythm of the horse's steps beneath her, the sway of its body, and the steady sound of hooves on the ground. A faint smile appeared on her face, and her dark eyes brightened as she realized she could do it. The rancher watched silently, proud of her courage. This moment was more than learning to ride again. It was a symbol of her recovery, of her growing trust, and of the strength that had carried her through the hardships she had faced. As the days passed, they spent more time together outdoors. The rancher taught her about the land, the different types of plants, the behavior of the animals, and the way the seasons changed the world around them. She listened carefully, asking questions and offering her own observations, some from her experience in the forests and rivers of her home. The rancher noticed how intelligent and resourceful she was, how her mind quickly understood the lessons of the land. They began to share moments of quiet laughter, small jokes, and simple companionship. These moments were precious, a rare warmth in the cold expanse of his life. Despite the growing comfort between them, a subtle tension lingered. The rancher knew that she would eventually need to return to her people, to her village and family, and that the safety he had provided was temporary. She, too, seemed aware of this, sometimes staring out across the fields with a distant expression, as if imagining the journey that lay ahead. Neither spoke openly about it, but the understanding was unspoken and mutual. It was a delicate balance, between recovery and departure, between connection and independence. Yet, they both moved forward, letting each day bring its own lessons and discoveries. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence post, the rancher glanced over and saw her watching him with intent eyes. She held a small bundle of wildflowers in her hands, delicate and colorful against the golden grass. She approached slowly, holding them out to him. "For you," she said softly, her voice hesitant but steady. He accepted them carefully, surprised and touched by the gesture. He could see the effort it took for her to offer something personal, and he understood it as a sign of trust, of connection. He smiled gently, placing the flowers in a small jar by the window where they could catch the sunlight. It was a simple act, yet it carried more meaning than words could express. Evenings on the ranch were quiet, but in those hours their bond deepened further. They would sit near the fire, sharing stories of the past, small hopes for the future, and dreams they had never dared speak aloud. The rancher told her about his life before the solitude, the family he had lost, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned from years of being alone. She listened attentively, sometimes touching his hand briefly in a silent gesture of understanding. Then she would speak of her own world, her family, her village, and the moments of joy and sorrow she had experienced. Though their stories came from different lives, there was a shared humanity that connected them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. One day, a sudden storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the plains, bringing with it a cold wind and distant rumbles of thunder. The rancher helped her inside, securing the doors and windows and gathering the animals to shelter. They worked together, moving quickly yet carefully, the air tense with urgency. As the rain began to fall, they sat inside, listening to the pounding of water against the roof and the whistle of wind through the cracks in the walls. In that moment, they found comfort in each other's presence, a quiet reassurance that even when the world outside was harsh and unpredictable, there was safety here together. Over time, their companionship evolved into a deep understanding. They no longer needed many words to communicate. A glance, a gesture, or a shared smile conveyed thoughts and emotions with clarity. She began to take initiative in daily tasks, helping with chores, feeding the animals, and even guiding him in some repairs. The rancher noticed how capable and intelligent she was, how she adapted quickly to the life on the ranch while still retaining her own sense of self. It was a delicate dance of balance, giving and receiving, teaching and learning, trusting and protecting. The rancher also began to see a change within himself. The loneliness he had carried for so many years began to soften. He found joy in her presence, comfort in their shared routines, and hope in the future he had not dared to imagine. Her trust, her courage, and her quiet strength reminded him that life could still hold surprises, connections, and moments of profound meaning. He realized that the bond forming between them was something rare, a connection that could not be forced or demanded, only nurtured and respected. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, the young woman and the rancher walked along the riverbank. The water flowed quietly, reflecting the colors of the sky, and the breeze carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. She paused for a moment, looking out over the water, her eyes thoughtful. The rancher waited, respecting her silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I feel safe here," she said. The words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. He nodded, understanding completely. Safety was not just physical, it was trust, comfort, and the assurance that someone cared without expecting anything in return. As they returned to the ranch, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. She moved with confidence now, no longer weighed down by fear, though still cautious of the world beyond the ranch. He admired her resilience, her strength, and her ability to adapt without losing herself. Each day together reinforced the quiet, powerful connection they shared, a connection built on trust, respect, and the unspoken understanding that they had become important to each other in ways words could not fully describe. The rancher knew that challenges would come. He did not know how her people would react to her absence, or what dangers might lie in the future. But for now, he chose to focus on the present, the days spent healing, learning, and connecting. Each moment was precious, each small gesture a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. He realized that sometimes the most meaningful bonds are formed not through grand actions, but through patience, compassion, and quiet presence. Night fell once more, and they sat together by the fire, sharing the warmth and comfort of the flames. The young woman leaned slightly closer, a gesture of trust and companionship. The rancher, watching her in the flickering light, felt a quiet sense of gratitude and wonder. Life had brought them together unexpectedly, yet in the strangest of ways, it felt perfectly right. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in many years, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that even in a world full of challenges, connections like these could change everything. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth from the last rain. The rancher had just finished feeding the animals when he noticed something unusual. From the edge of the distant field, he could see figures moving with purpose, riding on horses. They were few, but their movement was deliberate and confident. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. Instinctively, he knew these were not travelers or townspeople. Something about their posture, the careful way they handled their horses, suggested experience, strength, and perhaps a purpose that had to do with the young woman he had been caring for. He approached the young woman who was gathering fresh water from the nearby stream. "I think someone is coming," he said softly. Her eyes widened as she turned, scanning the horizon. She recognized the figures almost immediately. "They are my sisters," she said quietly, her voice mixed with relief and concern. The rancher nodded. He understood then that her family, or at least her close kin, had been searching for her. It was a moment filled with complexity, relief that she was safe, but tension over how the encounter would unfold. As the figures drew closer, the rancher felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. He had grown attached to her over the past days, not just as a caretaker but as a companion. He knew the bond they had formed was fragile, yet strong, and he wondered how her people would perceive him. Would they see him as a threat, or as someone who had genuinely helped her in her time of need? He readied himself, standing tall but not confrontational, prepared to explain, to show respect, and to let his actions speak louder than words. When her sisters arrived at the ranch, the young woman stepped forward to meet them. The moment was quiet, almost tense. They examined her carefully, noting her healed injuries and her overall state. Then their gaze turned to the rancher. He met their eyes steadily, not with fear or arrogance, but with honesty. He nodded in greeting. "I helped her," he said simply. "She was hurt near the river. She is safe now." For a moment there was silence, broken only by the soft neigh of the horses and the wind rustling the tall grass. The sisters studied him closely, their expressions serious but not unkind. They were skilled and confident, yet careful, as though weighing his character in every glance and gesture. Finally, one of them spoke. "She is alive because of you," she said quietly. Her words carried both gratitude and a cautious acknowledgement. The rancher felt a surge of relief. He had hoped his actions would be understood, that his intentions would be clear, but hearing it spoken aloud confirmed what he had feared might remain uncertain. The young woman looked at her sisters, then back at the rancher. Her eyes were filled with emotion, gratitude, relief, and a quiet strength. She stepped closer to him, her hand brushing briefly against his arm in a gesture of connection. The rancher noticed the way her sisters exchanged glances, subtle nods that seemed to communicate understanding without words. It was a language of trust and observation, one he could not fully interpret, but the message was clear. She had been cared for, respected, and protected during her time at the ranch. Then came the moment that would change everything. One of the sisters, looking directly at the rancher, spoke with a calm authority. "She chose you," she said. The words hung in the air, carrying a weight far greater than their simplicity suggested. The rancher blinked, taken aback. He had not expected this declaration, not in such direct terms. The young woman's sisters were acknowledging what he had sensed. The bond that had formed between them was genuine, meaningful, and recognized even by those who cared for her deeply. The young woman looked at him with eyes that spoke volumes. No words were necessary. In that quiet exchange, the rancher understood that she had made a choice, not out of obligation or fear, but out of trust, respect, and perhaps something deeper that neither of them could yet name. His heart, long accustomed to solitude, felt a strange warmth. It was as if a door that had been closed for many years had quietly opened, allowing light, connection, and possibility to enter. Her sisters, seeing the silent understanding between them, relaxed. They smiled faintly, their expressions softening with approval. "We can see it," one of them said. "You have been there for her when she needed it most. You have been honest, patient, and kind." Their words were simple, but they carried immense meaning. The rancher felt a wave of gratitude, not just for their acknowledgement, but for the validation of the bond he had nurtured with care and respect. Over the next hours, the rancher, the young woman, and her sisters talked quietly. The sisters asked about the ranch, the land, the animals, and his routines. He answered honestly, without exaggeration, allowing them to see the life he led, steady, responsible, and filled with care for those under his protection. The young woman occasionally added small details, guiding the conversation with gentle insight, her presence calm and assured. The atmosphere, once tense with uncertainty, softened into one of cautious respect and quiet understanding. As the day turned toward evening, the sisters prepared to leave, knowing their role was to escort her safely back to her village. The young woman turned to the rancher, a small, meaningful smile on her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." He nodded, understanding the depth behind her words. It was not just gratitude for care or protection. It was recognition of the trust they had built, the bond that had grown quietly over days filled with shared effort, patience, and gentle understanding. The rancher watched them depart, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and a faint ache. He had grown attached, and the thought of her leaving tugged at something long dormant within him. Yet he also understood that this was her life, her choice, and that their connection could remain strong even across distance. The acknowledgement from her sisters, the phrase "she chose you," lingered in his mind, a powerful affirmation of the respect, trust, and quiet affection they had cultivated together. After they had gone, the rancher returned to the ranch, walking slowly along the familiar paths, tending to the animals and checking the fences. The land was the same, wide and open, yet something within him had shifted. The solitude that had once been his comfort now felt different, less lonely, filled with the memory of trust, connection, and the knowledge that bonds could form even in unexpected circumstances. He realized that life had a way of bringing people together, often in the most surprising ways, and that he had been part of something extraordinary, even if it was only beginning. That evening, as he sat by the fire, he reflected on the events of the day. The young woman's choice, quietly acknowledged by her sisters, had changed the course of his life. He thought of her courage, her trust, and the resilience she had shown, not just in recovering from her injuries, but in opening herself to connection once more. He thought of his own life, the years of solitude, and how the past days had reminded him of the value of patience, kindness, and empathy. The fire crackled softly, and he felt a quiet contentment, knowing that trust, once earned, could create bonds that transcended fear, distance, and time. He also considered the future, uncertain but filled with potential. The young woman would return to her village, her sisters watching over her, yet the bond they had formed would remain. He could feel it in every glance, every shared moment of understanding, and every gesture that had passed between them. It was a bond not easily broken, one built on honesty, care, and the quiet acknowledgement of choice. And though the road ahead was unknown, the rancher felt ready to face it, strengthened by the connection that had quietly grown in his home. As night settled over the plains, the rancher looked toward the horizon, the stars beginning to appear in the deepening sky. He felt a sense of peace, not just from the events of the day, but from the understanding that life could bring unexpected gifts. Trust, kindness, and courage could create connections strong enough to change everything. And in the quiet warmth of his home, amidst the gentle sounds of the night, he knew that the story they had begun together was far from over. He sat for a long while, watching the fire, thinking of her, and the acknowledgement from her sisters. "She chose you," he whispered softly to himself. The words echoed in his mind, a promise and a reminder of the extraordinary bond that had quietly grown. In that moment, he understood that sometimes life's most meaningful moments came not from grand gestures, but from quiet trust, shared effort, and the courage to open oneself to connection, even when the world seemed vast, harsh, and uncertain. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the land in soft golds and pinks. The rancher had been awake before dawn, as was his habit, walking among the animals and checking the fences. But today, his mind was not entirely on the routine tasks. His thoughts kept returning to the young woman who had been under his care and the moment her sisters had come, the pivotal words, "She chose you," still echoing in his mind. That phrase had changed something in him. It had opened a door he thought long closed, reminding him that even in the quietest corners of life, connection and trust could bloom. He prepared a small breakfast, arranging plates and warm water, though he knew it would soon be a temporary meal. Today, she and her sisters would return to the village. He tried not to let his mind dwell too much on what that might mean, though he could feel the quiet ache of impending absence. The young woman had grown strong and independent again, her injuries fully healed, but their bond was undeniable. He had spent days nurturing her recovery, and in turn, she had reminded him of the warmth and companionship he had long denied himself. When she entered the kitchen, she smiled softly at him, a small, quiet gesture that spoke volumes. "Good morning," she said gently, her voice calm and steady. She had regained her strength and confidence, moving with ease across the wooden floor, her steps no longer hesitant. The rancher returned the smile, nodding as he placed a plate in front of her. They ate together in silence at first, the kind of silence that carried comfort rather than distance. He noticed her hands resting lightly on the table, the subtle gestures of ease she displayed, and it reminded him of the transformation she had undergone, both in body and spirit. After breakfast, they prepared for the journey back to her village. Her sisters were already mounted on their horses, waiting patiently near the edge of the ranch. The young woman gathered her small belongings, carefully folding and securing them, and the rancher offered to help, though she waved him off with a confident smile. "I can do it," she said, and there was pride in her voice. He nodded, respecting her independence, understanding that her choice to return was hers and hers alone, though the bond between them would remain. Before leaving, she stepped close to the rancher, her eyes meeting his with a depth of feeling words could not capture. She reached out briefly, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture of trust and connection. "Thank you," she whispered, and the rancher felt the weight of her words. It was more than gratitude for the care he had provided. It was acknowledgement of the respect, trust, and quiet companionship they had shared. He nodded, unable to find words that could fully express what he felt, but the understanding passed between them clearly enough. Her sisters approached then, speaking softly, acknowledging the bond that had formed and offering reassurance. "We know," one of them said gently. "We can see it clearly. She is safe, and she knows her choice." The rancher felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The acknowledgement from her family was powerful, confirming that his actions had been understood, that his honesty and care had been recognized, and that the trust he had earned was not fleeting. It was a moment of quiet triumph, not in grandeur or display, but in the pure acknowledgement of connection and integrity. As they mounted their horses and began the journey toward her village, the rancher walked alongside the young woman for a few steps before she turned to ride. He matched her pace, careful not to overstep but simply present. They spoke in soft, quiet tones, sharing small details and plans for the future. Though she would return to her family, they spoke of the promise to maintain their bond, to write, to visit when possible, and to remember the days they had shared on the ranch. The words were simple, yet they carried a profound meaning, a commitment not bound by distance but strengthened by choice, trust, and respect. During the ride, the rancher noticed how gracefully she handled her horse, confident and calm, yet still carrying a gentle awareness of her surroundings. He was reminded of the resilience she had shown from the beginning, through injury, fear, and uncertainty, and how that same courage had guided her to make her own choices. He walked beside her for a while longer, feeling both pride and a quiet sense of longing. The land around them stretched endlessly, golden in the sunlight, and yet he felt that no distance could diminish the connection they had forged. By the time they reached the edge of the plains near her village, the young woman's sisters slowed their horses, guiding her safely toward home. She looked back at him once more, her eyes filled with a mixture of joy, affection, and reassurance. "I will return," she said softly. The rancher nodded, a smile breaking across his face. There was no need for further promises. The understanding was clear. Her choice had been made, her trust had been earned, and their bond would endure beyond the limits of space and time. As he watched her ride away, the rancher felt a profound change within himself. The loneliness that had defined his life for so many years had softened. The bond they had formed, the trust and respect they had shared, had opened a door to connection, warmth, and hope. He realized that life, in its quiet and unassuming ways, could still offer moments of profound significance. A single act of kindness, a choice made with courage, could ripple through the days and create bonds that changed the course of a life. Returning to his ranch, he found the land both familiar and renewed. The animals went about their routines, the wind whispered across the fields, and the mountains stood silent in the distance. Yet the air felt different to him, filled with the memory of shared days, quiet laughter, and the gentle affirmation of connection. He understood now that his life had been enriched, not by grand events or distant successes, but by the simple, meaningful act of caring for another, and by the trust that had been reciprocated. That evening, the rancher sat by the fire, thinking of her and the journey they had shared. He reflected on the events that had brought them together, the unexpected encounter by the river, the careful tending of wounds, the growing companionship, and the quiet moments of trust. Each memory reminded him of the power of patience, empathy, and understanding. He realized that while she would continue her life among her people, the bond they shared had created something enduring, a bridge between two worlds, two lives that had intersected for a reason. In the following days, he found himself thinking differently about his solitude. It was no longer a shield against the world, but a space in which connection could grow, even quietly and unexpectedly. He walked the fields with a renewed sense of purpose, tending to the animals, caring for the land, and reflecting on the lessons of trust and companionship he had learned. He knew that the future was uncertain, that life could be unpredictable, but he felt stronger, more open, and more ready to embrace what lay ahead. Letters arrived in the weeks that followed, brought by travelers passing near the ranch. The young woman wrote with careful, thoughtful words, sharing glimpses of her life in the village, her continued respect for the rancher, and small notes of affection and trust. The rancher read each letter with care, feeling a warmth that had long been absent from his life. Though distance separated them, their bond remained alive, strengthened by choice, honesty, and the shared experience of care and trust. As the seasons changed, the rancher reflected on the transformation within himself. He had learned that loneliness did not have to define a life, that even the quietest hearts could form connections of profound significance. He thought of her courage, her trust, and her choice, realizing that it had inspired him to open himself to life in ways he had long avoided. The land, once simply a place of routine, now felt alive with the memories of shared days and the possibilities of future encounters. In the evenings, he would sit by the fire, often imagining her walking along the river, tending to her own tasks, smiling at memories of their time together. The bond they had formed was no longer just a fleeting connection. It had become a part of his daily life, influencing his thoughts, his actions, and his heart. He felt gratitude for the journey, for the trust she had shown, and for the reminder that life, even in its quietest moments, could hold profound meaning and joy. Months later, when the village celebrated a seasonal festival, the young woman returned to visit the rancher, accompanied by her sisters. The reunion was filled with laughter, stories, and quiet acknowledgement of the trust and bond that had endured. Her choice, once confirmed by her sisters, had proven true, and their connection had grown stronger over time. The rancher, once solitary and cautious, now stood among friends and family, feeling the richness of human connection, the depth of trust, and the warmth of shared experience. As the sun set over the plains, the rancher and the young woman stood together, watching the colors shift across the horizon. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of the land, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant calls of animals, and the quiet murmur of human voices. In that moment, he understood the full meaning of the journey they had shared, that trust, choice, and compassion could change lives, create lasting bonds, and open doors to hope, joy, and connection that were once thought impossible. The rancher knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. The young woman had chosen him, her family had recognized the bond, and their connection had endured across distance and time. In the quiet warmth of the plains, amidst the gentle rhythm of daily life, he felt a profound peace. Life, with all its trials and uncertainties, had brought him a gift far greater than he had expected, a reminder that even in the quietest, loneliest corners, the human heart could find connection, love, and the courage to open itself once more.